You spent 16 years learning how to be useful to everyone except yourself. Think about that for a moment. 16 years. Nearly 2 decades of your life dedicated to absorbing information, following instructions, meeting expectations. You learned algebra and history, grammar and science. You memorized dates, formulas, theories. You wrote essays, took tests, earned grades. You can probably still recite the periodic table or explain the causes of World War I. But when someone asks you what you actually want from life, not what you should want, but what genuinely excites you, what makes you feel alive, the silence is deafening. You can solve quadratic equations, but you panic when faced with a decision that doesn't have a clear right answer. You can write a 5-paragraph essay on any topic, but you struggle to articulate your own feelings. You know the capitals of all 50 states, but you don't know what brings you peace. But here's the question no one asked you to consider. In all those years of education, how much time was spent helping you understand who you are beneath all that knowledge? How much was dedicated to teaching you to trust your own instincts, to navigate your emotions, to make decisions based on your authentic desires rather than external approval? The uncomfortable truth is this: while you were busy becoming educated, something else was happening. Something quiet, invisible, and profound. You were being shaped not just to know things, but to think in a very specific way, to value certain outcomes, to fear certain possibilities, to see yourself through a particular lens. And now, years later, you might find yourself standing in a life that looks successful on paper, but feels strangely hollow on the inside. You've checked all the boxes, followed all the steps, done everything right according to the script you were given. Yet something fundamental feels missing. This isn't a personal failing. This is the predictable result of a system that was never designed to help you become yourself. So how did we end up here? How did a system meant to enlighten us leave so many of us feeling lost? The answer lies in understanding what education actually became versus what we believed it was supposed to be. Because from the very first day you walked into a classroom, you weren't just learning subjects, you were learning how to be. You were absorbing an invisible curriculum about what makes someone valuable, worthy, successful. And that invisible curriculum was far more powerful than anything written in textbooks. Look, I get it. You probably did well in school. Maybe you were the kid who got good grades, stayed out of trouble, made your parents proud. Maybe you were the one teachers loved because you followed directions and turned things in on time. Nothing wrong with any of that. What nobody told you though, was that while you were mastering that game, something else was quietly happening. You were learning to measure your worth by external validation. You were discovering that asking too many questions made you difficult. You were internalizing the idea that there's always a right answer, and your job is to find it, not to explore what the question even means. Remember those plastic chairs? The fluorescent lighting? The way your stomach would knot up before every test? Not because you didn't know the material, but because you'd learned that your value as a person could be reduced to a letter on a piece of paper? That wasn't education, that was conditioning. The grading system taught you something far more insidious than academic content. It taught you to see yourself as an A person, a B person, or a C person. It trained you to believe that external evaluation is more trustworthy than your own self-assessment. It convinced you that your worth could be quantified, ranked, and compared to others. According to a 2021 survey by Pew Research Center, over 60% of adults in the United States, many of them highly educated, admit they've questioned the purpose of their lives. 60%. That's not a coincidence. That's not individual failure. That's the predictable outcome of a system that prioritizes compliance over curiosity. Recent studies in developmental psychology show something even more troubling. Adults who excelled in traditional education often struggle most with making autonomous decisions. They've become so accustomed to external validation, grades, approval, clear instructions, that when life presents them with choices that require inner wisdom, they freeze. Modern education was never designed to help you understand yourself. It was created to make you useful, to train you to serve a system, not to help you become a conscious, self-aware individual. And the most insidious part? It worked so well that most of us never even noticed it happening. We just assumed that's what learning was supposed to feel like. Pressure, performance, the constant need to prove ourselves worthy of the next level. You were taught to remember, not to understand, to conform, not to question, to meet expectations, not to explore your own inner world. And now, as an adult, you might find yourself incredibly capable of functioning in the world, earning money, meeting deadlines, managing responsibilities, but completely unprepared to answer the question, what do I actually want from this life? Because you were never taught to explore it. You were trained to function in the world, but not to make sense of it on your own terms. This wasn't an accident. The structure of modern education didn't just appear one day. It was carefully built, shaped by the needs of a very specific kind of world, one that prioritized order, productivity, and control over creativity, questioning, and individual expression. The origins of the school system as we know it aren't rooted in a desire to cultivate free thinkers. They're rooted in the industrial age, when governments and factories needed disciplined, predictable workers. Not poets or philosophers or visionaries, but people who could follow instructions, meet quotas, and operate within rigid hierarchies without causing problems. You can still see it everywhere if you know what to look for. A bell rings to start the day. You sit in rows. You follow a schedule divided by subjects, just like shifts in a factory. You move from one task to the next on command. You're rewarded for compliance and penalized for deviation. Think about the absurdity. You had to raise your hand to speak. You needed permission to use the bathroom. You couldn't move from your seat without authorization. You were told when to eat, when to rest, when to think about math versus when to think about history. This isn't education. This is behavioral conditioning. And the hidden curriculum, the subjects that were never taught, emotional intelligence, critical thinking about systems and authority, self-awareness, how to process failure without it destroying your self-worth, how to sit with uncertainty, how to trust your instincts, how to define success for yourself. Instead, you learned to fear making mistakes, to seek constant approval, to believe that someone else always knows better than you do. Creativity becomes secondary, conformity becomes sacred. There's something that strikes me as particularly insidious. Somewhere along the way, we started believing this was natural. We forgot that learning used to be different. For thousands of years, humans learned through apprenticeship, mentorship, exploration. They learned by doing, by questioning, by making mistakes and figuring out solutions. A blacksmith's apprentice didn't sit in a classroom memorizing facts about metal. They watched, they tried, they failed, they learned. A young artist didn't take standardized tests on color theory. They mixed paints, experimented, developed their unique voice. But our system? It's the educational equivalent of trying to learn to swim by memorizing the chemical composition of water. We forgot that learning used to be different. You started school with curiosity, right? You asked questions. You wandered off topic. You wanted to know why. But the system wasn't built for that. Little by little, that wonder got trained out of you. Not through cruelty, but through something much more subtle. You learned that too many questions made you a problem. That raising your hand too often was annoying. That exploring ideas outside the curriculum meant you weren't staying focused. So you adjusted, because you're smart, and you figured out the game. You gave the answers they wanted. You stayed inside the lines. You learned that it was safer to follow than to challenge, easier to absorb than to explore. The result? You began to associate learning with anxiety instead of excitement. You stopped reading out of curiosity and started reading because you'd be tested. You stopped writing to express yourself and started writing to fit a rubric. And the most dangerous part? You were praised for it. You were told you were a good student. Not because you thought for yourself, but because you didn't make trouble. You followed instructions. You didn't question authority. You did exactly what was expected. But think about what that really means. If education rewards obedience over originality, what kind of intelligence is it actually cultivating? Jiddu Krishnamurti put it perfectly. Real education means awakening the capacity to think for oneself. But thinking for yourself isn't convenient for a system built on conformity. Independent minds challenge the script. They don't fit easily into standardized tests. So instead of awakening thought, the system teaches imitation. Instead of nurturing questions, it drills answers. The result is a kind of quiet flattening of the human spirit, a slow erosion of what makes each person unique. And what's the real cost of all this? What happens to people who spend their formative years learning to suppress their questions, ignore their instincts, and measure their worth by how well they can perform someone else's version of success? Well, you probably already know, because you're living it. You walk into adulthood carrying degrees, certifications, an impressive resume. On paper, you look prepared. You're educated, qualified, ready. But inside, something crucial is missing. And let's talk about what that degree is really worth. You spent 3, 4, maybe 5 years of your life and tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands, to get a piece of paper. A receipt, really. A receipt for jumping through hoops, for proving you could sit still and regurgitate information on command. The dirty secret? Most people with degrees aren't even working in the field they studied. They're not using what they learned. The universities collected their tuition, handed them their diploma, and sent them into a world where employers care more about skills, creativity, and problem-solving ability than about whether you can remember what you crammed for finals. You've got a bachelor's in psychology working in marketing, a master's in English teaching yoga, an MBA managing a small business that has nothing to do with what you studied. The degree was supposed to be a key to opportunity, but it turned out to be just an expensive way to prove you could follow instructions. You can solve complex problems at work, but when life throws something personal and messy at you, a relationship ending, a career crisis, a loss in the family, you freeze. Because nobody taught you how to navigate storms that don't come with instructions. No one showed you how to make decisions rooted in self-knowledge. Psychology Today reported in 2020 that many adults experience high levels of anxiety when facing personal decisions, not because they're incapable of choosing, but because they were conditioned to seek guidance from others instead of trusting their own judgment. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? For so long, someone else made the big choices. What to study, what's considered success, what path to follow. Even now, you might find yourself seeking permission, approval, certainty from outside yourself instead of developing the muscle to trust your own inner compass. Nobody warns you about this. You can have a master's degree and still not know what brings you peace. You can earn awards and still feel directionless. You can be praised for your discipline and work ethic and still wake up one day wondering whose life you're actually living. The system taught you how to chase goals, but it never asked if those goals were actually yours. So many of us end up moving through life like actors playing a role. We hit milestones, check boxes, build careers that look impressive from the outside. But in the quiet moments when no one's watching, we sense the truth. We're strangers to ourselves. And this shows up everywhere. At work, you find yourself seeking your manager's approval the same way you once sought your teacher's gold star. In relationships, you struggle with authentic connection because you've spent decades learning to perform rather than just be. You say you're not creative because no one ever encouraged you to explore, to play, to make things just for the joy of making them. You experience imposter syndrome, that nagging feeling that you don't belong, that someone's going to find out you're not as competent as you seem. But maybe that feeling isn't pathology. Maybe it's wisdom. Maybe some part of you knows you're living according to someone else's script. And that's when the real questions start surfacing, the ones education never prepared you for. Is this really me? Is this what I wanted? Or is this just who I was told to become? I need you to understand something, and this might be the most important thing I say in this entire piece. None of this programming is permanent. Those beliefs you inherited about success, the fears you carry about being different, that need for constant external validation, none of that is hardwired into your DNA. It was learned, and what was learned can be unlearned. The first step isn't to burn everything down or reject all of your education. The first step is simply to notice, to start questioning the unquestioned, to ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Who benefits from it? And does it actually serve me anymore? Because until you recognize the programming, you're still living inside it, still operating within a framework designed not to help you thrive as an individual, but to keep you aligned with a system that needs predictable, manageable people. This is the beginning of real awakening, not some dramatic moment of rebellion, but a quiet return to yourself. A recognition that so many of the limits you live with aren't real. They were installed. That your discomfort with uncertainty isn't a character flaw. It's the result of being trained to fear anything that doesn't come with clear instructions. Carl Jung said it beautifully. The The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege requires courage. The courage to disappoint people who expect you to stay the same. The courage to question systems that reward conformity. The courage to trust your inner voice over the crowd's applause. Research in developmental psychology shows us something encouraging. People who engage in regular self-reflection and question inherited beliefs don't just feel better. They demonstrate higher levels of creativity, resilience, and life satisfaction. They're not just more successful by external measures, they're more authentic, more alive. Neuroscience backs this up too. Your brain has something called neuroplasticity, the ability to form new neural pathways throughout your life. Those patterns of seeking external validation, of fearing uncertainty, of needing permission. They're not permanent wiring. They're learned habits that can be unlearned and replaced with healthier patterns. Think about the people who've made the biggest impact on the world. Many of them succeeded precisely because they questioned the educational and social norms of their time. They didn't follow the prescribed path. They trusted their inner compass over institutional approval. But this kind of education, the real kind, doesn't come with a syllabus. It comes with uncertainty. It requires you to sit with questions that don't have easy answers, to embrace the discomfort of not knowing, to trust that confusion is often the first step toward clarity. I understand that's terrifying for minds that were trained to need the right answer immediately, but it's also liberating, because when you stop fearing the unknown, you start discovering who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. Where do you go from here? How do you begin the work of reclaiming yourself? To be clear, this isn't about throwing away everything you've learned or becoming some kind of anti-education rebel. This is about integrating your formal knowledge with something deeper, your innate wisdom, your authentic desires, your unique perspective on what makes life meaningful. Here's how you actually begin. Start with your questions, not your answers. The next time you feel absolutely certain about something, a belief, a goal, a fear, pause and ask, where did this come from? Is this actually mine, or did I inherit it? Don't judge what you find, just notice. Reclaim your curiosity like it's a superpower. Read books that challenge your worldview. Write without trying to impress anyone, just to hear your own thoughts. Take walks without podcasts or music. Let yourself wonder again without needing to immediately find answers. Practice sitting with uncertainty. This sounds uncomfortable, I know, but when you don't know what to do next, resist the urge to immediately seek advice or distraction. Sit with the not knowing. Let the question breathe. Often, the answers you need are already inside you, waiting for the noise to quiet down. Define success for yourself, seriously. Take some time, actually block out time in your calendar, and write down what success means to you. Not what you've been told it should mean, but what would actually make you feel proud at the end of your life. What would make the time feel well spent? Trust your instincts over institutions. Your body knows things your mind hasn't figured out yet. That restlessness you feel about your job, that resistance to certain social expectations, that might not be weakness, that might be wisdom trying to get your attention. Create actual space for stillness. Schedule time for nothing, not productivity, not self-improvement, not entertainment, just being. In that space, you'll start to hear the voice that's been waiting patiently beneath all the noise. Find people who ask better questions. Surround yourself with questioners, not just validators. Seek out mentors and friends who challenge you to think deeper, not just tell you what you want to hear. Redefine your relationship with learning. Start approaching new knowledge from curiosity rather than obligation. Read books because they intrigue you, not because you should. Take up hobbies that serve no practical purpose except joy. Let yourself be a beginner again. Watch for the warning signs. Notice when you're slipping back into old patterns, seeking approval before making decisions, feeling anxious when you don't have clear instructions, measuring your worth by productivity or external achievements. These aren't character flaws, they're just old programming surfacing. Practice making small autonomous decisions. Start with low-stakes choices where you trust your instincts over outside opinion. What do you want for lunch? What movie speaks to you? What direction feels right for your weekend? Build the muscle of internal navigation. And remember, this isn't a one-time realization, it's a practice. Some days you'll feel clear and authentic. Other days you'll catch yourself falling back into old patterns of seeking external approval. or avoiding uncertainty. That's normal. That's human. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is consciousness, becoming aware of when you're living according to your authentic desires versus when you're running someone else's program. Because when you begin living as yourself, not as a role, not as a product of other people's expectations, something extraordinary happens. You stop feeling like you're performing your life and start feeling like you're actually living it. You make decisions from clarity rather than confusion. You pursue goals that energize you rather than exhaust you. You contribute to the world in ways that feel authentic rather than obligatory. And maybe most importantly, when you encounter other people, especially young people, you start asking different questions. How can I help them think for themselves? How can I support their curiosity instead of their compliance? How can I model what it looks like to live authentically? In the end, real education isn't preparation for life, it is life itself. It happens when you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "Who am I when I'm not trying to be anyone else?" That question doesn't come with a curriculum, but it comes with something far more valuable, the possibility of a life that's truly, authentically yours. You were never meant to just fit in. You were meant to wake up, to question, to return to the curious, questioning person you were before the world told you who to be. The system taught you to seek permission, but the only permission you need is the one you give yourself. To think freely, to live authentically, to trust that your inner voice isn't a distraction from your education. It is your education. Your real education begins now, not in a classroom, but in the quiet moments when you choose truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, your own questions over everyone else's answers. That's not just learning, that's living. And it's the most important subject you'll ever study.